to talk about an interesting topic that we just wrote an article on. Actually, you did, Dr. Tino. That's being published on Medium, correct? It's also on LinkedIn
Yes.
about the obsession with, quite frankly, us as TV viewers with some really bad people, sociopaths, psychopaths, serial killers. It's like that's the new star now. What's going on?
Well, it's really fascinating, and welcome everybody. We're going to kind of dive into a very complex topic from the psychiatric point of view in terms of the psychology and the sociology and our fascination with sociopaths, which is fairly prevalent now. I mean, I get into Netflix, I get into Prime Video, I get into HBO. And when you start looking at some of the most successful um, shows and series, whether it's about fantasy, like Scarface is a movie or Succession and those kinds of shows, or whether it's about documentary series, serial killers, things of that sort. We have this fascination, and I have to say that there's a lot of fascination that tends to tilt more toward men
Mm,
than women. And that fascination with men, not that women don't admire sociopaths to some degree, because they elicit some of the traits that in the surface make a man be a man. So there's a connection between masculinity and sociopathy,
mm.
issues of strength and power and control that are exaggerated among the sociopaths, and that becomes a way for men to have a love-hate relationship with a sociopath, right? And down deep, to some degree of envy. How come I cannot be like that? How come I'm restricted by my morals in terms of expressing my sociopathy? Because as we've talked before, when we talk about sociopathy in the context of personality, we all have some of it, right?
Mhm.
Because normal personalities, all of the abnormal personalities in good balance. So we have some sociopathy, some dependency, some narcissism, some obsessiveness. So when we put all those traits of personality into balance, we can react to life in a way that is adaptive, right? So when we talk about a sociopath, we're talking about someone in which those traits of sociopathy are so intense and so frequent that create dysfunction. So that's how we define sociopathy in general.
Wasn't it Nietzsche who said that, or Nietzsche, that morality was something that basically constrained the normal man?
Well, yes, you're correct.
And
That has been.
it's important to note he died of syphilis, but so one of
Yeah,
those
well,
things. But
yeah, the reality is that morality is a compromise. Morality are the guides that we have used all toward the history of humanity to behave less than animals. Okay. Because when you talk about whether it's Nietzsche or you're talking about Freud or you're talking about a lot of those people, we're talking about this conflict between drive and restraint, right? So some of the drive is very conscious, some of it is very unconscious, but the reality is that as humans, we have a big part of us that is driven toward reproduction, for example, that are driven toward survival, that are driven toward aggression. So morality kind of allowed us to live in society, right? So over the evolution of man, we have created rules. Some of the rules are pretty universal, and some of them have been moved into religion, some of them have moved into morality in general. But if you really look at it, they're basic factors of and values of respect, uh, of not intruding into other people's space, into not to respecting somebody else's property. All of that is kind of together with a lot of our society values, right?
So I have a question because I remember kind of when this started. Obviously you mentioned earlier Scarface. He was really the first, you know, I wouldn't call him an anti-hero. It was just a truly despicable human being. And I remember being very confused that my friends were like, "Wow, isn't he cool? And isn't he this? And isn't he that?" And I'm like, "No, he's just a really horrible guy." When did that? What is it? That little connection with the machismo that allows men to look at somebody like that, or the Sopranos is another one, right? All my friends watch that show. They're like, "How come you don't watch it?" I'm like, "I refuse to watch shows that make heroes out of despicable people." I don't. I mean, I understand the documentaries. Tell me how Jeffrey Dahmer grew up and what he did, but these TV shows that really, I mean, I think they are geared for us to be enamored with these truly despicable human beings.
Well, there's a lot to be said, and I think that Scarface was one of the originals. I mean, you can look at The Godfather prior to that, right?
Good point.
Uh, and I have to tell you, The Godfather was for many years one of my favorite movies in terms of the sociodynamics, not necessarily the sociopathic, but they were, I mean, the conflict between values and presenting themselves as the
More
um,
upstanding people when they weren't.
exactly, but at the same time, maintaining some values within their society, their subsection of society, which was the criminal world, in which they had to have some rules, right? So what happens is that normally we are fascinated by the sociopath who's a criminal, but we have to remember that sociopathy is not limited to criminality
Hmm,
or can be connected to soft criminality, right? In terms of machismo, in terms of, uh, I remember a psychodynamic professor I had back in the 1980s who used to tell me that the best sociopaths were leaders because they never got caught, right? Interestingly enough, one of the features that discovers a sociopath is how they react to getting caught in a criminal act. It's not the fact that they killed someone, it's a fact that they got caught.
hmm.
And they react with a lot of frustration and anger and rage when they get caught, right? But they have no moral compass to say whether this was wrong. Now, interestingly enough, you see that in a lot of industries with the CEO of a company, right? That with this his signature, he can fire 10,000 people in 1 year, right? With no questioning of the impact that's going to have on the individual who's getting fired, right? All in the name of the surviving of a company. So, sociopathy can be in the leading boards and in the leading people who are running companies too, or people who run in governments.
Hmm.
Okay,
We see a
so
pretty good example of that last couple of years.
yes, so narcissism, sociopathy, and something we call borderline personality go hand in hand. So there are no pure narcissists and there are no pure sociopaths. There's always an interchange of those features.
So, is this fascination and, in a weird way, almost normalization, maybe, of some of these behaviors? Is that a negative for our society?
Well, it depends. You know, I mean, let me present you with a situation. We have kind of Swiss egos and super egos in that under certain circumstances society accepts that killing is okay, right? Society accepts that if you have to protect yourself you can protect yourself by killing somebody else, or if you're in war, different circumstances, right? So it's not as black and white as we may want to think. So we have to understand that a lot of our definition of what is sociopathic or not, it's a fine line of intensity and frequency. So in my business, whenever we define pathology, I'm sorry about the noise, but I have my grandson here. When we get into this situation of sociopathy, um, we have to measure it in three ways: how much, how often, and what is it doing to society and the individual. Because what happens is at the end of the day, the sociopath never thinks of themselves,
Hmm.
meaning they are victims of their own sociopathy.
Gotcha.
Okay, because sociopathy is a very empty state of emotion. It's all about the thrill of the moment. It's all about the power. It's all about the control. But they never turn inward. Okay, because turning inward, for some of them creates a conflict. For some of them has no need. There are people who are more or less, right? And but they also get shown in movies and in series, the cold-blooded uh, killer who has no sense of remorse. I mean, the contract is the price, and you never question the morality behind it.
So, if you were to choose a current character of all these different shows as the archetype for this, and then give us the warning signs, but also the caveats and the way to combat it, who would that be?
One of the most fascinating sociopaths in series and TV was Dexter, right? And
Now,
Dexter,
was he a sociopath or a psychopath or both? Because wasn't he a serial
well,
killer?
yes, there is no longer a definition of a psychopath, right?
Hmm.
In modern psychiatry, so a psychopath, the closest you can get to actually sociopathy and psychopathy are no longer in our lexicon in
Hmm.
terms of a day-to-day conversation, right? Because we have to separate who is a sociopath based on their personality and who is outside of reality, meaning getting into the psychotic spectrum. So a psychopath will be a sociopath that gets outside of reality, or
Okay.
creates their own reality. And those are very, very damaging because there are other factors involved in their acts, in terms of grandiosity, in terms of self satisfaction, in terms of sexual gratification, all kinds of different things that get beyond just being a sociopath, right? So if we think about Dexter, for example, uh, the character that was being presented was quite sociopathic. Now, what was the gratification, the secondary gain from his acts of killing people could have been psychotic in nature, right?
Hmm.
So, but those are two separate things. But I think that the ability of Dexter to present himself as as a normal human being, right? Even though he was aloof, he was distant, he was cold blooded, he didn't have a lot of questioning of himself, right? And then he felt that in his non-reality based decision making, that he was doing good
Hmm.
by killing people, right? And that is the sociopath that seems to be more attractive, but also more dangerous in terms of serious, because it plants the idea and the seed in your mind that sometimes killing is okay,
So it's a just internal justification for their actions.
or gratification, right? I mean, you can justify it logically as this person is worse than me and deserves to die. But you see, when you get to that point from the morality point of view or the religious point of view, you kind of end up playing God,
Hmm.
right? You decide who lives and who dies. And in our morality, in any religion or in the basic morality, we should never be in a position of deciding who dies or live, unless your life is in danger or you're in a war, right? Is when we give ourselves permission, ourselves permission to do so.
So, was this something that just happened over time? I mean, when did it tick over? Again, my whole life is I've observed this. I always ask people if they don't know who Jonas Salk is, and some other people that were incredibly influential, but not infamous because of the horrible things they did, or not celebrities, or whatever it is. People don't seem to know who they are. But take somebody. The Kardashians are a good example. Um, she did something on tape, and that next thing you know, she's very famous. It's something that we in the past 10 years before we've been like, oh my god, that's despicable. It almost, I mean, the sex tape that almost ruined Rob Lowe's career would now make his career.
Yeah.
It's what has happened? Are we just really falling off the trail here, or is this you know kind of the Roman Empire all over again?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, you really have to look at this from the perspective that this has always existed, right? And morality is a work in progress. Even though we have basic human values, right? We end up playing God at different stages of our evolution, like saying, well, I decide who's human. So, so Native Americans and Black people are not human. So they can be my slaves. And you can see my grandson behind me. So you can understand that the evolution has been cheated consistently over time by a group of people defining who's worth and who's not, right? So the flexibility and our Swiss cheese superego, which is a way of saying our morality full of holes, okay, continues to exist and we continue to evolve, right?
So could you say that this is a survival mechanism that allows us to justify despicable acts when they are necessary for survival or conquest?
Well, you know, one
Because
of the
you do something horrible to take over, let's say, a country or to rescue people. You're doing some horrible things. Is it innate in us?
oh, absolutely. I mean, is a projection of our survival. Okay, human is no different than a group of lions, you know, eating a zebra, right? The group of lions were hungry, okay, and to survive, they had to kill that animal and eat it, right?
Mhm.
Now, translate that into a bigger society that has winners and losers, right? And when you get into that situation, sorry, when you get into that situation, you end up with a complicated matter, right? You end up with finding logical human high level intellect justifications for why you invade Ukraine. Okay, and then you try to justify with other people. The issue is that this has been there since the creation of capitalism. And I'm not against capitalism. I believe that trade and I believe that changing things is good for everybody, but excessive, right, creates the need for how do I justify that that person is getting more than me and I want what they have, so I had to kill them.
Mm.
Now we are a little more sophisticated, but the basic is the same, right? So when you look about competition, right, then you have people who compete fairly and people who don't. And then those who don't sometimes use sociopathic ways to get what they want. So
And
you
to
have
justify their means, correct, as well.
exactly. Now that has existed in all societies, you know, for power and control. So at the end of the day, there's this innate trait toward dominance, right? Particularly among males, in particular by younger males, okay, in which younger males had to fight the older male to get the girls. So that trait is there. How we have learned to tame it and to control it, it's been the history of humanity, right? But we still, once in a while, have these offshoots of people who, for biological, psychological, and social reasons, they feel entitled to. Women entitled to money, entitled to power, and they'll do anything to get it.
Last question, because I know you have your dinner there, and of course your grandson. Should we be worried about this, or is this again, like you said, this is just part of how we are?
You know, I was born in the '60s, I'm still here in my '60s, and I find some things never change. Right, the dangers are really into when the sociopath becomes a cult leader,
Mm,
and we blindly follow. Right, without understanding that we're following someone who wants power, dominance, and control, and who doesn't care about you. And that is the danger, right? Whether it's here, whether it's in Brazil, whether it's in Mexico, whether it's in Spain, it doesn't matter. We have seen the examples through history, right? And we tend to repeat the same mistakes, right? So, and that in essence is part of our short term memory animal behavior, meaning self gratification, immediate reward is more important, right, than longevity of health. So that is very dangerous. I mean, in my country, in Mexico, right now, we have had about 120,000 homicides in the last year.
wow.
Right, one of the most it's become one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and it's not necessarily that everybody's being killed indiscriminately, but among this subculture of sociopathy and narco control, we're having a lot of wars among them, and people are disappearing, people are dying. You know, human trafficking has become a major issue and a major profit center for these groups. So if there's not drugs, it's people,
Mm.
women, children, and that is how we how the glorification of this needs to be counteracted by a society that goes back to basic values. And people, as we grow and the society grows like that, more and more people become entitled entitled to dominance, to power and control. And that feeling, and I've seen a lot of sociopaths over my lifetime. I've treated many of them. Some of the most intelligent, people that can fake being very caring, but they will kill you, if you become a problem for them. And what I've learned is that um, these people can be your best friend today, and they can turn around and kill you tomorrow. It means nothing to them. I mean, we've seen it in the politics in the United States in the last 4 or 5 years. You know, we have had a past president who was like, I call it the reverse Midas king, because everything he touches doesn't turn into gold,
No,
it
it
turns
does
into
not.
mystery. I mean, anybody who has gone against him is in trouble, right? And he's measuring the thousands. So the question is, every individual, needs to ask themselves not what's in it for the movement, but what's in it for me as a healthy human being. Think of yourself. What's in it for me?
Well, as you always say, let's get back to values first, and go on from there. Thank you, doctor, for your time. Please go enjoy your
Okay.
dinner with your grandson and your family, and
Thank
hopefully we'll
you.
see you all again next week.
See you next week. Bye bye.
Bye.